American policy in the Middle East. In almost every area, we witnessed surprises during President Trump's visit to the Gulf. I would like to invite Dr. Eric Mandel, founder of the MEPPIN Institute, to clarify where things are heading. Are they moving in the right direction? What is required in order to seize opportunities while avoiding taking unnecessary risk when it comes to American interest in ensuring Israel's security?
Good morning, everyone. So I think before I get into American policy in Lebanon, Syria, what's going on in Iran, I want you to understand what's going on in the United States now. And I think for Americans, it's hard to understand what's going on. So to understand U.S. foreign policy, you need to understand that President Trump and the rise of populism is very different than traditional Republican foreign policy. I think you need to think about it as security-minded internationalists like Senators Tom Cotton and Lindsey Graham, as opposed to more isolationists, or as they like to call themselves, restrainists, like Tucker Carlson, who has the president's ear, and Tulsi Gabbard. The MAGA, America First ideology prioritizes American interests and minimizes allies' interests. As you saw, the president prioritizes trillion-dollar, even though I think they're overstated, deals. And I think an indication of where America is in foreign policy, certainly in this region, is what the president did regarding the Houthis, where he made a deal and left Israel out, and that being a harbinger of possible American foreign policy in relation to what was its primary ally in the region, that being Israel. So maybe another way to look at this is a comparison between President Reagan and current President Trump. So you have Trump, his foreign policy realism is based upon commerce, transactional, but without the American values, democracy building, and idealism. President Reagan was also a realist, but it was totally built upon American idealism and values. So, oops, sorry, I think I went the other wrong way. So I wait again. The President Trump is not just doing this totally on his own. There's an American public that's behind him besides his base. And so I think you have to ask the question, and this is the most recent way you can think about how Americans look at the Middle East, is what percent of Americans are sympathetic to Israel? Now, granted, it's more related to what's going on in Gaza now, but less than 50% of Americans are sympathetic towards Israel. Now, 3/4 of Republicans are, but 59% of Democrats sympathize with Palestinians versus 21% sympathizing with Israel. And this is a Gallup poll of 2025. So with that as a background to understand America, President Trump, and where it is, because it is certainly different than what Israel has been dealing with maybe in its previous 77 years, what is American policy for Lebanon? So American policy for Lebanon is the following. It's to strengthen the LAF, no Hezbollah in their government, to support President Noon's reformation of that government, enforcement of the ceasefire, or at least seeing what's going on, to cut Hezbollah's access to international financial systems, and humanitarian relief. I'm just going to jump for a second. Sarit told me not to add any more slides, which I won't, but I just wanted to say I read this morning regarding cutting access. The Lebanon Daily Star this morning said the United States had launched a new initiative to dismantle Hezbollah's infrastructure in South America in the tri-border region of Argentina, Brazil, and Paraguay. And it's part of the State Department's Rewards for Justice program to get specific evidence of what's going on. And just in the category of no things are new, this is 10 years after President Obama stopped Operation Cassandra, which was an investigation into Hezbollah's drug activity, and that was to secure JCPOA 1.0. And that's when all the DEA, American Drug Enforcement Administration, had already found much evidence of the drug money laundering that was going on with Hezbollah, and that was stopped. And by the way, this was all reported in Politico, which is not a right-wing outlet. So so just continuing on Lebanon, the U.S. Special Envoy Morgan Ortagus has urged Lebanon basically to implement UN Security Council Resolution 1559 as opposed to just 1701, which is full Lebanese control over the whole country, not just south of the Litani River, in regarding disarming Hezbollah. I don't think this is particularly realistic, but President Noon basically said the likely cost would be to absorb some of Hezbollah's fighters into the LAF. And it's interesting, when I was with Sarit in our State Department, we talked about some specific Hezbollah people that are currently, in the LAF. And I basically, my government doesn't really want to hear about that. It doesn't kind of fit the narrative of what they want to follow. So regarding the United States supporting and its concerns regarding the Lebanese Armed Forces, the LAF. So how has my government supported the LAF? So in January, before Trump took over, President Biden reallocated monies from Israel and Egypt, $100 million to support the LAF. President Trump lifted a freeze on $95 million of assistance to the LAF. So what is my government concerned about? The LAF's limited resources, poor payment, not enough money paying troops. They need more troops. So the question is this going to translate into getting Trump to give more money to the LAF and maybe giving more money before they can prove that they really are fighting Hezbollah effectively? So what America oversees what's going on here. We have just had a change. We now have Major General Leaney, who has replaced Major General Jasper Jeffers, who oversees the ceasefire. But where are they overseeing the ceasefire from? From Beirut. There's no American soldiers who are doing firsthand information in southern Lebanon. They're getting the information from UNIFIL and maybe from the LAF. And so the question really is here, the mandate of our government to our people in Lebanon is a strong relationship between the LAF and the United States. So are we sweeping things under the table if the LAF is not really doing what it needs to do? And by being in Beirut and not getting firsthand information, I think it's misleading my government into believing things are better in southern Lebanon than they really are. On to Syria. President Erdogan wants President Trump to accept a strong Syria under Turkish influence. So Erdogan is lobbying my president, saying the combination of Qatari cash to rebuild a devastated Syria with Turkish influence, that Syria can become stable. The president wants to have things done quickly. He doesn't want to care really how it is. It's not about democracy building. And then the golden ring for President Trump is, then Erdogan says, you could have all your troops, the 800 to 1,000 American troops in places like Al-Tanf, they can leave. And that's music to the president's ears. So to give you an idea of President Erdogan's influence on President Trump, it says, Trump told reporters, here's a quote, "We told the Israelis we are going to remove the sanctions. Turkish President Erdogan thinks we should do it." So what, from an American perspective, do we think what has Israel told the administration or Congress? They are preferring a decentralized Syria, not under Turkish hegemony. Israelis are worried that Syria turns into a Turkish forward operating base where the jihadists are still in control. Al-Shura what the Israelis have told my government is Al-Shura has stocked the army and key ministries with his loyalists, and the new constitution places too much power in Al-Shura's hands, or Al-Jalani. And Israel recommended a distrust and verify policy, which was my assessment also. But Israel, and also warned of the jihadi threat to the minorities that are there, Erdogan's threat about what about the Kurds in the northeast, thinking about what he did less than 10 years ago to the Kurds in the northwest, in the Afrin area. And from an Israeli perspective, they were hoping for autonomous zones in Syria. Unfortunately, in my government, in my government, both it is bipartisan, and this is I work in one of these offices, Senator Risch and Senator Shaheen, who were the two senior people in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, were pressuring the administration to have sanctions relief, before you knew where al-Shira was. And you had a lot of, there was a congressman who went up and spoke with al-Shira, Martin Stoltzman, and it was basically sounding like he was writing talking points for al-Shira, saying he's open to a Golan Heights deal, wants to rebuild Syria into a free republic. Shara is reducing terrorists. It's in the United States and Israel's interest to align in integrating al-Shara. So there's a tremendous amount for the removal of support for Syria and al-Shara. They see him as reformed. They don't see that he is a jihadist in a suit. On to Iran. Maybe the true existential issue. We're not talking about what's going on in Gaza today. We're going to stick with Iran. I was involved in the Iran. I had a front row seat in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee from 2013 to 2015. And so I have a unique perspective about what's going on today. So what is today President Trump's bottom line for a nuclear deal? Is it nuclear dismantlement, or is it about civilian enrichment, allowing Iran to still have civilian enrichment? Will he allow the IRGC to keep an enrichment infrastructure, keeping the centrifuges there, maybe in mothballs? What about the proxies? If there's sanctions relief, if a deal is made, is there anything in what's negotiated so he doesn't rearm Hezbollah and Hamas and the Houthis? Is he willing to abandon the Iranian people? I have to be forthright, I work with Iranian activists. And what about the ballistic missiles? None of these things are being addressed, just like in the JCPOA 1.0, none of this was addressed. None of it is being addressed right now, at least according to my Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, that none of these things are being addressed right now in the negotiations. So a JCPOA 2.0. So this is a leaked option. I don't have firsthand confirmation of this. From this week is that the United States has offered Iran that they would freeze enrichment for 3 years, followed by being allowed to do 3.67% enrichment. And anybody who knows that if you allow enrichment, it is not a tremendous leap, especially with the knowledge and experience, to get to 90% in a very short order. And nothing in the current negotiations is about disclosing past nuclear weaponization work. Remember, there are three components here, if you will, to the nuclear stool, which has 3 legs on it. You have enrichment, they know how to do that. They have ballistic missiles, they know how to do that. The only thing is the question of weaponization. That's the computer modeling, the compartmentalization of nuclear material into grapefruit-sized spheres on top of a ballistic missile. By the way, that's not the only way they can do that. So what are Iran's goals from an American perspective? And this is what I tell Congress. Stretch out negotiations to prevent an Israeli strike. The longer the negotiations go on, Israel cannot strike, because Israel does not want to have the wrath of President Trump while he's negotiating. And certainly, if he makes a deal, will Israel take the risk of become completely isolated from America, because Trump's wrath could be that if Israel strikes Iran and a regional war occurs, to, who knows, cut off supply lines. It is Iran's goal is to retain its infrastructure. They have strategic patience. They want sanctions relief. So the regime can remain strong, and they want to wait out President Trump's term. So the key questions on U.S. policy and negotiations are, do the Iranians believe Trump is bluster, where he says bad things could happen if you don't agree to a deal? So the question is, do the Iranians believe that Trump has a true, credible military threat? All of those B-2s in Diego Garcia that are sitting there. Does President Trump realize that Israel, after disabling the anti-missile systems in October, the Israelis disabling them, that he has his best leverage because Iran is weak? President Trump is supposedly a great negotiator, and does he realize that actually if there was a strike, that's maybe the best time to negotiate because Iran would be even more vulnerable? Finally, does the president and his administration realize that there are other options to become nuclear for Iran, other than the current path. They may not be able to put it on a ballistic missile, but they can develop a Hiroshima-style type of nuclear weapon and claim that they are a nuclear power. They could also have a few from their friends in North Korea shipped on a container ship and claim to be a nuclear power. So there are other pathways other than, we need to think out of the box of what the Iranians can do to show they're a nuclear power and have the ultimate deterrence. And finally, is the president's special envoy, who really had no Middle East experience, on the other side, Jared Kushner didn't, but did amazing things with the Abraham Accords. But is Special Envoy Witkoff the right person to negotiate with the Iranians? It was reported that when he was dealing between Russia and Ukraine, he used a Russian translator, and not an American translating from Russian. So he seems to have made some missteps along the way. And the question is, I wrote this piece for The Hill, can a transactional real estate businessman outwit the experienced and wily Iranian negotiators? And he has gone back and forth in saying if Iran can have a nuclear weapon. He has not gone back and forth. He has said they cannot have a nuclear weapon, but regarding enrichment and things like that, he seems to go back and forth. And is that reflective of the president, or inexperienced, or purposeful? And finally, if I had more time, and I'm happy to discuss this, I think Qatar is a major issue, even though, and even when we're dealing with the North, Qatari money coming into Syria, coming into Lebanon, and its influence in the United States is a big issue to discuss maybe in a future conference. If anybody wants to talk to me after, fine, I'd be happy to. And if you write to me, please take a picture of the slide. I will be happy to respond to you. Thank you.